It began on the edge of summer. June 2005. Three friends, Ethan Moore, Ryan Jacob, and Mark Holloway, packed their gear into an old Ford pickup and left the small town of Evergreen Falls, Washington. They were 22 recent college grads. No plans, no deadlines. Just a long weekend in the woods before life started for real. They told their families they'd be camping near Rainier National Forest, a stretch of wilderness filled with thick pine, narrow logging roads, and long miles of nothing. They were supposed to be back Sunday night. They never returned. The story of what happened to them would grow into one of the most puzzling disappearances in state history. 3 men, 1 truck, no footprints, no bodies, no goodbye. For 17 years, their names sat on a list of unsolved cases. And then, a single camcorder, buried beneath inches of moss and dirt, changed everything. But before that discovery, there was only silence. Ethan was the planner, the one with maps taped to his dashboard and weather forecasts printed from the library. He was practical, organized, always worried about running late. Ryan was the opposite, spontaneous, restless, always the first to jump from the boat or climb a ridge just to see what was up there. Mark was a quiet one, the observer. He'd recently bought a second-hand camcorder from a pawn shop and brought it along just to record memories. The 3 had been friends since high school. They'd spent half their lives exploring the woods that surrounded their town. No one ever thought they'd get lost there. On the morning of June 10th, Ethan texted his sister from a gas station near the park entrance. "Signal's bad up here. Back Sunday night. Don't worry if you don't hear from us." That was the last message anyone ever received. By Monday morning, their family started calling. By Tuesday, they filed missing person reports. Rangers searched the main campsites first, the lake trails, the logging roads, the fire tower overlooks. No sign. On the 3rd day, a Ranger helicopter spotted the group's pickup truck parked along a service road near Iron Ridge, 30 miles from the nearest Ranger post. The keys were still in the ignition. Inside were 3 sleeping bags, food supplies, and 1 unopened case of bottled water. The driver's side door was unlocked. The passenger door was open. There were no signs of a struggle, just tire tracks ending abruptly in mud, and 3 sets of footprints leading toward the trees. Search teams fanned out across 10 square miles of forest. 9 units followed scent trails that stopped suddenly near a creek. Drones captured aerial photos, showing flattened grass in the shape of a tent, but no tent remained. Investigators noted something else. A circle of rocks beside the creek, blackened from an old fire. In the ashes, they found a half-burned photograph of the 3 friends taken a week before the trip. The faces were intact. The background was missing, burned completely away. Local news outlets covered it for weeks. 3 young men lost in Evergreen Falls wilderness. Their families gave interviews. Volunteers hiked through rain and cold, refusing to give up. One of them, a retired ranger named Alan Burke, later said something strange. "Every night around the same time, our dogs would start barking toward the ridge, like they could hear something we couldn't. But no one found anything." By late July, the official search ended. The case was classified as missing, presumed deceased. The only physical evidence was a truck, a torn backpack strap, and a watch belonging to Ryan Jacobs, discovered hanging from a branch nearly 12 feet off the ground. How it got there, no one could explain. Years passed. Families moved away. The story faded from news cycles. But in Evergreen Falls, the locals never stopped talking. Hunters claimed to find abandoned campsites deep in the forest, coffee still in cups, ashes still warm, no sign of who had been there. Every few years, someone would report hearing voices at night, faint laughter, a shout, echoing from nowhere. The forest grew thicker, swallowing old trails, and somewhere beneath the moss, the truth waited. 17 years later, a man walking his dog off a closed service road stumbled on a patch of disturbed soil. He noticed a glint of glass, something half buried, edges worn smooth by rain. He brushed away the dirt and lifted it out. A small mud-stained camcorder, labeled in fading marker. Mark's tape, 2005. Inside the battery compartment was a memory card, miraculously intact. Within hours, police sealed the area. The camcorder was sent to a state forensic lab for recovery, and for the first time in 17 years, there was something new to examine. When the footage was finally restored, what they saw didn't solve the mystery. It deepened it. When the camcorder arrived at the Washington State Forensic Imaging Unit, technicians weren't sure it would power on. The casing was cracked, the lens shattered, and moisture had eaten through most of the internal wiring. But the memory card inside was a miracle. Sealed tight, dry, untouched since 2005. It took 2 days to clean and stabilize the files. When the first fragments of video loaded onto the monitor, the lab went silent. The timestamp read June 10th, 2005, 6:42 p.m. The first image, a tree line fading into evening light. Laughter behind the camera. 3 young voices, alive, unaware that this was their final recording. The footage began simple. Routine clips. The drive up the mountain, Mark joking from the back seat, Ryan holding a map upside down, while Ethan rolled his eyes. Typical friends. Ordinary trip until the second hour. Investigators watched as a camcorder followed the group, setting up camp near a small clearing beside a river. Ethan's watch in frame showed 7:33 p.m. They'd built a fire, cooked, laughed about nothing. Normal. But in the background of one clip, behind the glow of the fire, a faint light flickered deeper in the trees. The footage panned away too quickly to catch it clearly. No one in the recording seemed to notice. At 8:11 p.m., Mark turned the camera toward himself, grinning. "We made it," he said. "Middle of nowhere. Perfect." Behind him, Ryan poured something into a tin cup. Ethan checked the tent straps. Everything calm. But when analysts enhanced the audio, they caught something under the wind. A low mechanical hum. Steady, distant like a generator. Problem was, there were no generators within 50 miles of that location. By the fourth clip, night had fallen. The screen turned black except for firelight and shapes moving near it. The camera panned left and stopped on the riverbank. A faint glimmer, reflection from water. Then 2 white points, small and still. At first, the lab team thought they were fireflies, but the pattern didn't match. The points didn't blink. They just stared. The footage cut out abruptly. Forensic analysts recovered 12 total clips, 9 playable, 3 corrupted. They restored the audio first. That's when the case took a darker turn. Clip number 6, timestamp June 10th. 11:27 p.m. Shaky camera. Heavy breathing. Mark whispering. "Something's out there." Ryan's voice lower. "Probably a deer." Rustling. A branch snaps. Then silence. Until the microphone picks up a single word. Spoken so softly that even the FBI lab later debated whether it was human. "Run." The final clear image in that clip shows Ryan standing with a flashlight aimed toward the woods. Behind him, a shadow moves, long, thin, not shaped like any of them. Then static. End of clip. Detectives Linda Perez and Tom Keller, who had been rookies during the original 2005 investigation, were called back to review the evidence. They spent the next 2 months piecing together every second of usable footage, mapping the camera's coordinates frame by frame. The forest of friends had camped was dense. No GPS signal. No phone towers. But one clue emerged. In clip number 8, a reflection in the lens caught a landmark. A rusted metal sign reading, "Old Quarry Trail, closed." That sign had been removed in 2008, meaning the camera had recorded the group within a very specific zone. A zone that hadn't been searched thoroughly before. Perez ordered a full re-examination of the site. Drone scans, thermal imaging, ground-penetrating radar, at the coordinates from the video. They found traces of something metallic buried under shallow soil. Not human remains, but an old camping stove, crushed and twisted, the same model seen in the footage. It confirmed one thing. The friends had camped exactly where the video said they had. After that, the trail vanished again. Back at the lab, the digital forensics team recovered fragments of the corrupted clips. Most were unrecognizable flashes, white static black frames, muffled sound. But one sequence stood out. A brief shot, maybe half a second long. The camera on its side, boots running through mud. The lens tilts upward, trees spinning, sky fading. Then a single voice shouting, "Mark, wait!" Static. End of file. Investigators slowed it to quarter speed. They realized the voice wasn't Ryan's or Ethan's. It was deeper, older. Someone else had been there. For weeks, police searched historical visitor logs for anyone else camping near Iron Ridge that weekend. No matches, no vehicles registered, no rangers on patrol. But one entry stood out. A handwritten note in the old park registry dated June 9th, 2005, one day before the friends arrived. It read, "Temporary maintenance. Trail closed until further notice. GH." There was no employee with those initials in park records. The trail had never officially been closed. By mid-August, the forensic team completed the last sequence restoration. The 12th and final clip played for just 27 seconds. A dark blur, low breathing, and a single light flickering across the ground like a flashlight swinging in someone's hand. Then a noise, a thud, metal scraping rock, and Mark's voice screaming something unintelligible before the feed cut off permanently. When the technician stopped the playback, the room was quiet for a long time. Then Detective Perez said what everyone was thinking. If this was just a missing person case, why did someone bury the camera? No one answered, but deep down, they all knew what that meant. Someone had returned to that campsite. Someone who wanted that footage hidden. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the Evergreen Falls disappearance was officially reopened. Detectives mapped out a new timeline, calling in everyone who had been within 50 miles of the forest in June 2005. Truck drivers, rangers, fishermen, even a group of contractors who'd worked at a logging site nearby. The same question to each of them. Did you see 3 young men camping by the river that weekend? Most said no. A few hesitated. One finally answered yes. A retired logging worker named Glenn Harris. He said he'd seen smoke from a small campfire near the old quarry road that Friday night. He remembered hearing voices. 3 or 4, maybe more. But by morning, the site was silent. And when he'd passed again on Sunday afternoon, the fire pit was gone. The ground raked smooth, like someone had erased every trace of what happened there. When detectives Linda Perez and Tom Keller received a call from Glenn Harris, they drove 3 hours north to meet him in person. Harris was 72 now, retired, living alone on the edge of Evergreen Falls. A man who'd spent 40 years cutting timber and fixing machinery in those woods. His memory wasn't perfect, but what he remembered clearly. Perez described the moment later as walking into someone else's past. The house smelled of oil and cedar. A faded map of the logging routes hung on the wall, every road drawn in by hand. Harris poured black coffee and spoke without prompting. "I didn't think it mattered back then," he said. Nobody asked the right questions. He told them he'd been hauling equipment the weekend the 3 friends vanished. Friday night, June 10th. He'd stopped near Old Quarry Trail to check a loose chain on his trailer. That's when he saw the fire. 3 kids laughing, cooking. Nothing strange. But there was another truck, maybe 50 yards uphill. Headlights off, engine running. Perez leaned forward. "You're sure?" "Yeah, thought it was another crew maybe. But when I drove back Sunday, both were gone. fire pit flattened, like someone swept the ground clean. The original 2005 reports never mentioned a second vehicle. If Harris was right, someone else had been up there the same night. Perez asked if he could describe the truck. He paused, tapping his cup. Dark blue, maybe gray. Older model, two-door. There was a dent on the side. And, yeah, I remember a sticker on the bumper. Said something about search and rescue. Keller and Perez exchanged a look. Search and rescue didn't patrol that region in 2005. It was managed by a private volunteer group, most of whom had been questioned and cleared long ago. But one name stood out in the old records. Jack Nolan, an off-duty ranger who'd lived less than 10 miles from the trailhead. They pulled Nolan's personnel file. He'd left the service abruptly in late 2005. No forwarding address. No digital record beyond that. In the margin of his termination report, someone had written in pencil, frequent unauthorized patrols near Iron Ridge. That alone was enough for a warrant to re-interview him. Meanwhile, the families of Ethan, Ryan, and Mark gathered again for the first time in nearly 2 decades. They'd lived 17 years with no closure, learning to speak about their sons in past tense. When the police told them about the new evidence, the hope that flickered in their eyes was different this time. Not bright, just desperate. Ethan's mother asked the only question that mattered. If that man saw them, does that mean they were still alive Saturday? Perez hesitated. We don't know yet. Back in the field, investigators revisited the original campsite using new coordinates from the footage. Trees had grown thicker, trails had shifted, but the land still carried memory. Ground-penetrating radar picked up an anomaly 3 feet below the surface, 20 yards from where the campfire had been. It wasn't human remains. It was metal. When they dug it out, they found a folded license plate, crushed and bent, numbers barely visible through the rust. When cleaned, it matched the registration of an old Chevy Silverado, a model registered to Jack Nolan. They tracked him down to a small town near the Oregon border. He was 60 now, gray-bearded, quiet, working part-time at a bait shop. When detectives approached, he didn't look surprised. Perez introduced herself, told him they were reopening the 2005 Evergreen Falls case. He stared for a long moment, then said softly, I wonder when someone would come back for that. Inside the small office, they recorded the interview. Perez, you were seen near Old Quarry Trail the weekend of June 10th. Do you recall why? Nolan, I do. I was looking for a missing hiker. Keller, official search? Nolan, no. Personal. My cousin's kid. Never reported. He rubbed his forehead. I drove through the area, saw a fire down by the creek. Thought about stopping, but something fell off. Perez, what do you mean, off? Nolan, it was too quiet. No music, no chatter. Just one voice yelling. Then it stopped. I figure it was kids arguing. I left. Perez showed him a still image in the camcorder, the reflection of the old quarry sign. Nolan, that's the place. Right there. Perez, and your truck, why was it found buried? Nolan didn't answer at first. Then he whispered. It wasn't supposed to be there. The room went silent. Perez leaned in. Jack, what happened that night? I don't know, he said finally, but whatever I saw, I've tried to forget. He asked for a lawyer. The interview ended. When investigators searched Nolan's property the next morning, they found old maps of the Iron Ridge region, annotated with circles and numbers. One mark in red ink read Q17. Underneath, don't dig. The forensics unit compared soil samples from the license plate with earth from Nolan's backyard. They matched, but there was no evidence linking him directly to violence, only that he'd been there and that he'd gone to lengths to hide it. Theories began to form. Had the 3 friends stumbled upon something they weren't meant to see? Illegal logging? A buried site? An off-record operation? Media coverage reignited overnight. National networks aired clips of the restored footage. The haunting whisper, "Run." The flashlight beam, the screaming, and one question echoed across every broadcast. Who buried the camera? The discovery of Nolan's truck reignited public outrage. Petitions flooded the sheriff's office demanding answers. Old witnesses resurfaced, each with fragments of memory. A noise at weekend, a smell of smoke, a shadow moving near the road. But none could explain the 17-year silence. As the investigation deepened, Perez requested a second forensic pass on the camcorder, hidden in the audio of clip number 9. Under layers of static, analysts detected something new. A second, overlapping voice. Faint, distorted, but just clear enough to make out 3 words. "It's still recording." When she heard it, Perez said she felt her blood run cold, because that phrase hadn't been spoken by any of the 3 missing men. It matched Jack Nolan's voice sample. The evidence was circumstantial, but it told a chilling story. Nolan had been closer than he claimed. Close enough to touch the camera. Close enough to hide it. In a press briefing, Perez remained cautious. "We have new leads," she said, "but until we recover physical remains or additional footage, we can't close this case." Still, the public already had its verdict. Headlines declared Nolan the prime suspect. Neighbors shunned him. The bait shop closed. Within weeks, he disappeared. His house abandoned. Truck gone. Another vanishing act in a story full of them. And somewhere in those woods, beneath 17 years of silence, something else waited to be found. When news broke that Jack Nolan had vanished, it felt like the story was looping on itself. Another disappearance. Another unanswered question. Detective Linda Perez watched the morning headlines flash across national news. Suspect in 2005 missing friends case disappears without a trace. Outside her office, reporters crowded the steps. 17 years of silence had turned into noise overnight. At first, police thought Nolan had fled. His truck was missing, his phone left behind. The bait shop locked, key still in the door. But inside his small living room, officers found something stranger than a getaway. On the table sat a single VHS tape, labeled in fading ink, Q17 Final. Next to it, a note written on an old receipt. They never left. Don't let them be forgotten. Perez sent the tape to the forensic lab. It contained a recording of trees swaying in heavy wind, the camera slowly tilting toward the ground. No people, no speech, just static, and the sound of branches creaking like whispers. The metadata showed the video had been shot 2 days before Nolan disappeared. While the technical team examined the tape, Perez and Keller traced his last movements. Security footage from a gas station near Rainier Pass showed him buying 2 jugs of water, a coil of rope, and diesel fuel. He paid cash. Looked directly into the camera. No sign of panic. He left heading east, toward Iron Ridge. By dusk, detectives were scouring every service road in that direction. They found the truck first. Engine cold, doors locked, parked beside a dried-out creek bed. Inside were muddy footprints on the floorboard, a lantern, and a plastic evidence bag that once contained something small. Whatever it was, Nolan had taken it with him when he stepped into the woods. He never came back out. For the families of Ethan, Ryan, and Mark, the news reignited everything they'd spent 17 years trying to bury. Ethan's mother, Carol Moore, stood on her porch surrounded by microphones. She looked into the cameras and said, softly, "I don't care who's guilty. I just want to bring my son home." Ryan's father refused interviews. Mark's sister began collecting signatures for a federal task force review. Grief, hope, anger, all the same storm, just different directions. The town of Evergreen Falls changed overnight. Old posters were reprinted. Social media pages appeared with grainy clips from the recovered camcorder. True crime forums argued over every frame. Was Nolan rescuing them, chasing them, or cleaning up after something worse? Back at headquarters, the VHS tape revealed its first clue, frame 312, a brief reflection of light on metal, a license plate corner. Analysts enhanced it until numbers surfaced. 77F H29. It matched a plate registered to a Forestry Service trailer that had been retired in 2004, the year before the disappearance. The trailer's last documented use: transporting surveying equipment to Iron Ridge. Whoever filmed that tape had been standing near the same area the three friends vanished. Perez watched the footage again and again. Something about the rhythm of the wind didn't sound natural. She had the audio isolated and amplified. Under the gusts, a faint rhythmic thump appeared. 3 beats, then pause, then 3 again. The same pattern captured in Mark Holloway's original camcorder clip. Coincidence or echo, it meant one thing. Nolan had gone back to the same spot. When search teams swept the creek where his truck was found, they discovered new footprints, larger boot prints overlapping smaller ones. At least 2 people had walked that path recently. The prints ended abruptly at the riverbank. Beyond that, nothing, as if the water had swallowed them. While investigators battled rain and mud, news networks turned the tragedy into spectacle. Talk show hosts debated motives. Online detectives drew red lines between the friends, Nolan, and obscure rumors of illegal logging. One theory claimed the camcorder footage showed hidden barrels in the background, chemical waste. Another said the man had stumbled onto private land and been silenced. Perez ignored it all. She focused on the facts. Nolan knew something, and now he was gone. In early October, a park maintenance worker radioed in about a smell near Old Quarry Trail, a sour metallic odor drifting from a collapsed shaft. Investigators arrived within hours. The entrance was blocked by debris, but freshly disturbed. Inside, they found Nolan's rope tied around a protruding tree root, the end disappearing into darkness. The first 30 feet dropped into an abandoned mine tunnel. At the bottom lay an empty diesel, carrying fragments of burned paper. Lab analysis later confirmed traces of magnetic tape among the ashes, as if someone had destroyed another recording. The discovery deepened the family's torment. Carol Moore visited the site days later, escorted by rangers. She stood at the edge of the shaft and whispered, "Ethan, if you're down there, I'm sorry we stopped looking." The wind carried her voice downward, and for a moment, it sounded like an answer came back, but it was only the echo of her own words. Reporters called Nolan's story a second mystery inside the first. To Perez, it felt more like a mirror. Same forest, same silence, same unfinished truth. That winter, snow buried the roads again. Searches paused. Evidence froze under ice. But the lab kept working. They digitized the final seconds of Nolan's VHS tape frame by frame. In the last few pixels before static, a faint outline appeared. 3 blurred figures standing in a clearing, hands at their sides, facing the camera. Forensic analysts said it could be trees, shadows, anything. Perez wasn't so sure, because one of the figures wore what looked like a ranger's jacket. Snow melted late that year. By March, the mountain roads were open again, and the investigation moved back into motion. The mine at Old Quarry Trail had sat sealed for decades, a relic from the 40s, used briefly for copper, then abandoned when groundwater flooded the lower levels. Now it was a crime scene. Detective Linda Perez stood at the edge of the shaft, while engineers lowered pumps into the darkness. Diesel fumes, echoes of metal against stone, the smell of cold earth rising after years without air. Ground-penetrating radar showed a hollow space 50 feet below the debris line. That was where Jack Nolan's rope disappeared. When the first section was cleared, they found his flashlight wedged between rocks. Batteries corroded, lens cracked. Beside it, boot prints preserved in clay. One set matched Nolan's size. The other, smaller, lighter, belonged to no one logged on site. Forensics photographed everything. Each object tag lifted, sealed, every vibration recorded. At 48 feet, the crew hit metal, a rectangular shape half buried in mud, not part of the mine structure. They dug carefully. When the mud peeled away, the object revealed itself. A steel storage chest, military issue, the type used for field communications gear. Stamped on the lid were faint letters. U.S. Forestry Survey, property of Div 7. Division 7 had been dissolved in 1972. Perez radioed up. Stop pumps. Secure the box. The chest was winched to the surface and laid out on a tarp. Its hinges were fused shut by rust. Technicians cut it open under a white canopy as cameras rolled. Inside lay reels of magnetic tape, a field logbook, and a corroded handheld transmitter connected to a spool of wire. The tapes were labeled with simple dates. June 8th, 05, June 9th, 05, June 10th, 05. Forensic audio specialists transferred them to digital format. The first two reels contained routine radio chatter, weather readings, coordinates, field notes. But the final reel, the one marked June 10th, 05, was different. At first, only static. Then a man's voice. Testing channel 3. Contact lost at marker Q 17. Another voice answered, faint under interference. Copy that. They're still at the creek. Advise hold position until dark. Then silence. A low hum filled the remainder of the tape, rising and falling like breathing. Investigators matched the voices to historical rosters. The first speaker was identified as G.H., Glenn Harris, the retired logger who'd first come forward. The second voice remained unknown. When confronted, Harris denied ever using radio equipment that weekend, but the tape proved otherwise. He'd been communicating with someone in those woods on the night the three friends vanished. Perez replayed the recording dozens of times. At minute 7:13, the background static changed pattern. It wasn't random. It pulsed rhythmically. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. The same sequence heard in Nolan's VHS audio. The team triangulated the original transmission source using residual frequency data. It led them to a secondary tunnel branching off the main shaft, collapsed since the early 2000s, but reachable through a narrow crawl space. They cleared the passage, following Nolan's rope deeper until it frayed into black water. On the wall above the flood line, someone had carved letters with a knife. Stop digging. Below it, the initials JN scratched twice, one over the other, once neat, once frantic. Divers entered the flooded chamber with helmet cams. Visibility, less than 2 feet. Temperature, 39 degrees. At the 15-meter mark, their lights caught something gleaming in silt, a twisted frame of metal tubing. They assumed more mining debris, until they brushed away the mud and saw fabric clinging to it, seatbelt webbing. It wasn't mining equipment. It was part of a vehicle, a truck chassis, roof crushed inward. The serial tag matched Jack Nolan's Silverado. How his truck ended up 50 feet below a seal mine baffled engineers. The tunnel entrance was too narrow, the angles wrong. It was as if the vehicle had been dropped vertically through the ground. Inside the cab, they found a small waterproof case wedged under the driver's seat. Inside that, a digital camera. The model was identical to the one recovered from the 3 missing men's camp. Same manufacturer, same year. When powered on, the screen flickered once, then displayed a single thumbnail. A still photo dated June 10, 2005, 11:31 p.m. The image showed the campsite. Ethan Moore standing near the fire. Behind him, half in shadow, a man wearing a ranger's jacket. Perez stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. Every timeline they'd built was collapsing. If the metadata was genuine, that picture had been taken less than a minute before the last clip on Mark's camcorder. That meant Jack Nolan had been there with them, alive and close. The discovery turned the mine into a full forensic excavation. Teams sifted through every layer of mud and silt, pulling out fragments of nylon, shoe rubber, plastic buttons. One object made the room fall silent. A cracked wristwatch frozen at 11:32 p.m. Ethan Moore's initials were engraved on the back. When the clock was photographed, Perez noticed faint scoring marks along its edge, as though someone had tried to carve letters into it with a knife. 3 partial characters remained visible, GH, the same initials from the radio tape. That evening, Perez called Harris again. He didn't answer. Deputies dispatched to his property found the house empty, coffee mug still warm, front door open. Another silence added to the chain. Forensics estimated the truck had been submerged for years, its frame preserved by mineral deposits. No remains were found inside, only traces of synthetic fabric and one torn patch from a uniform sleeve bearing the forestry emblem. They cataloged everything. Each artifact another question. Who buried the camera? Who burned the tapes? Who kept returning to erase the evidence? By the time the sun set over the ridge, Perez stood alone at the site, watching mist rise from the mouth of the mine. Somewhere below her feet lay 17 years of lies, and perhaps, at last, the path to the truth. She turned off her flashlight. The darkness swallowed the beam instantly. For the first time, she understood what the missing had seen on their last night. Not a monster, not a myth, but the sheer weight of silence in a place that keeps its own secrets. For months, the recovered tapes, photographs, and soil samples filled an entire wing of the state forensics lab. Every piece of evidence from Iron Ridge was laid out like a map of silence. Detective Linda Perez stood before the timeline board. Strings connecting dates, photographs, coordinates. 17 years of fragments, now almost forming a picture. The digital camera found inside Jack Nolan's truck became the anchor point. Metadata confirmed its clock had drifted only 3 minutes since 2005. That allowed technicians to sync its single surviving photo. Ethan Moore near the fire, with the timestamps from Mark Holloway's camcorder. At 11:31 p.m., both devices recorded simultaneously. 2 angles of the same moment. Audio engineers isolated background sound from each recording. Different devices. Same night, same rhythmic pattern. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats again. Not random interference, mechanical. The spectrum matched the frequency of a portable generator. The Forestry Service had used that exact model during site survey operations in 2005. Records showed one generator signed out on June 8th by Glenn Harris. Investigators reconstructed the likely sequence of events. June 10th, 6 p.m., Ethan, Ryan, and Mark reached the creek and set up camp. 8 p.m., an unknown generator starts within half a mile. 9 p.m., Harris and Nolan exchange radio traffic from the old Division 7 box later found in the mine. 11:31 p.m., the 2 cameras capture the same scene. 11:32 p.m., Ethan's watch stops. From the magnetic tapes recovered in the chest, analysts extracted faint telemetry beeps buried beneath the voices. They were geolocation pulses used in early forestry mapping, still traceable through archived satellite logs. When plotted, the coordinates drew a small loop around the Q-17 mine shaft, a restricted test area used decades earlier for soil stability experiments. Nolan's handwritten notes from his home matched those coordinates exactly. He hadn't stumbled onto the mine by accident. He'd been looking for a Q-17 all along. The theory formed quickly. Nolan, an ex-ranger, and Harris, a contract surveyor, had been working an off-record operation to remove outdated mapping equipment from the closed shaft. The 3 campers unknowingly pitched their tent on top of that access zone. When Harris radioed Nolan, they're still at the creek. He wasn't describing colleagues. He was reporting trespassers. But something went wrong. Forensic metallurgy on the steel chest revealed explosive stress. Metal bowed outward. Residue analysis identified traces of diesel and ammonium nitrate, the same combination used to collapse old mine entrances. Someone had tried to seal Q-17 that night. The engineering unit modeled the sequence on computer simulation. At 11:32 p.m., a surface charge detonated near the creek's edge. Blast radius, 15 meters. Shockwave pressure, enough to throw debris and ignite nearby brush. Camcorder footage ending in static. Ethan's watch stopping at 11:32 p.m. marks camera falling, all synchronized with that detonation. No bodies were ever found because the blast had pulled them into the collapse zone, 30 feet of soil and rock that sealed the lower tunnel. Nolan's truck in the flooded chamber was explained next. Seismic modeling suggested the secondary shaft had given way during the blast, creating a vertical sink. When Nolan returned years later to recover evidence, the weakened ground collapsed again, swallowing the vehicle. His fingerprints on the rope proved he descended voluntarily. The scratches on the wall, "Stop digging," were likely his last warning before he escaped the collapse. The chain of evidence now formed a brutal simplicity. Harris and Nolan operated unauthorized demolition of the Q-17 shaft. The three campers set up directly above it. At 11:32 p.m., a mistimed charge detonated. Both men concealed the accident, destroyed logs, and buried remaining footage. The last unresolved question was motive. Why seal a tunnel that had been abandoned for decades? In the Division 7 logbook, Perez found an entry from 1971 marked "Contaminated materials, do not expose." Pages after that were missing. But laboratory isotope tests on soil from the chest detected trace radiation. Harmless now, but proof that the shaft once stored experimental survey instruments with small cesium sources. If Harris and Nolan had been hired to clean the site quietly, the presence of civilians would have turned an environmental violation into a federal crime. When confronted with the reconstruction, Harris finally spoke. He admitted to running the generator, to hearing voices from Creek, to calling Nolan in panic when he realized people were camping above the test shaft. He insisted the explosion was an accident, a timer malfunction. Perez listened without comment. The recorder clicked off. Forensic divers returned to the collapse zone in late summer. Using micro-drilling rigs, they retrieved personal artifacts, belt buckles, fragments of nylon tent, a melted phone battery. Each item placed carefully into evidence trays. No human remains, only the remnants of ordinary life cut short. DNA traces on the tent fabric matched all three missing men. 17 years of mystery reduced to 3 lines in a report. Occupants, deceased. Cause of death, blast trauma and burial under landslide material. When the reconstruction was presented to the state attorney, no charges were filed. Harris's statute of limitations had long expired. Nolan was presumed dead. The file was closed as industrial negligence resulting in accidental fatalities. Perez watched the case box slide into storage. Inside were 2 cameras, a watch, a melted flashlight, and 1 steel chest labeled Q-17. For the first time, every timeline aligned. Every unanswered sound in the recordings made sense. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something still moved beneath the neat paperwork. The generator's hum, recorded on all devices, contained a second layer of data. Audio analysts had missed it until the final review. When slowed by a factor of 10, it revealed a repeating sequence of numbers, coordinates again, but not within Washington. They pointed 60 miles east, to another inactive shaft along the same survey line. Perez stared at the printout. If Harris and Nolan had sealed 1 tunnel, maybe there were others. She folded the page, slipped it into her notebook, and said quietly to herself, "The map isn't finished." The coordinates led east, across a valley of dead pines and eroded roads, to a place that wasn't on any current forestry map. Detective Linda Perez drove in silence. The wipers clicked against drizzle. The tape of the old generator hummed looping through her phone's recorder. She'd listened to it 100 times. Now she knew what it was. A signal, a beacon, not calling for help, but marking something left behind. The new site lay near Blacktail Ridge, a restricted parcel listed as environmental survey property. But the gate was unlocked. Rust on the hinges, no tracks in the mud. No one had been here for years. Beyond the fence, a clearing, and in its center, a sinkhole half collapsed, rimmed by concrete segments and rebar. Another mine mouth, unrecorded, unmarked, spray-painted faintly on one fragment with the letters Q18. She called headquarters. Keller's voice came over static. "You sure it's connected?" "The coordinates say yes," she answered. "And I don't believe in coincidences anymore." He promised to send a field crew by morning. Perez decided to stay. She set up a floodlight and unfolded the Division 7 map from the evidence box. The survey lines ran like veins through the mountains. Q15, Q16, Q17, and now Q18. Each aligned perfectly along the same fault. Each closed the same year. The map smelled of mildew and diesel, as if the paper remembered everything it had witnessed. She climbed down halfway to the collapsed entrance. The ground was slick, layered with ash and old pine needles. Her flashlight beam found something buried under leaves, a rusted tripod mount, and next to it, a small metal tag stamped DIV-7 camera unit. She lifted it, brushed off the dirt, a faint serial number. Another camera had once stood here. When the field crew arrived, they brought sonar and drones. The first scan showed a large chamber 30 meters below, bigger than Q17, its ceiling intact. The drone descended through a natural fissure, its feed flickering in green static, until it stabilized on a view that made everyone in the tent go quiet. A cavern of concrete walls, 2 steel containers, and between them, a row of sealed barrels wrapped in plastic, each marked with a faded trefoil radiation symbol. The radiation levels were minimal, but enough to explain the secrecy. Division 7 hadn't been mapping soil. They'd been storing contaminated survey cores from Cold War research. Small, controlled, but illegal to abandon. Someone had spent years covering the evidence, blowing entrances, burying the past. And in 2005, 3 friends happened to camp directly above it. Perez leaned against the tent pole, the weight of 17 years pressing in. Every detail, every unexplained sound, every silence. It all circled back to this. She imagined the friends laughing around their fire, unaware of the ground trembling below them, the generator starting, Harris and Nolan arguing over the radio about timing. Then the charge misfired. A spark, a collapse, not murder, not mystery, just negligence wrapped in secrecy, covered by fear. Still, one question burned. Why had Nolan kept coming back? Why the second tape, the warnings, the carvings? She scanned the drone footage again, frame by frame. In the far corner of the chamber, half buried in silt, a human silhouette lay beneath a fallen beam, torn fabric on one arm, a forestry patch still visible. Nolan hadn't escaped. He died trying to reach the barrels, maybe to expose them, maybe to destroy them. They retrieved his remains carefully. Beside him, inside a waterproof pouch, a small notebook survived. Pages fused, ink bled, but a few words legible. "If anyone finds this, tell them it was never supposed to happen. We thought we were cleaning up. We buried them twice." Perez closed the notebook slowly. For the first time, the line between guilt and grief blurred. At headquarters, forensic chemists confirmed the barrels contained low-grade radioactive soil mixed with diesel-based stabilizer, the source of the distinct metallic scent described by every search team since 2005, when the blast at Q17 ruptured one barrel. The vapors triggered false fire signatures on early thermal scans, leading rescuers away from the true collapse zone. 17 years of misdirection born from a chemical reaction. Perez wrote the final sequence into her report. Timeline complete. Cause identified. Case closed. But closure felt hollow. Truth in black ink couldn't measure the human wreckage left behind. Families, towns, years of imagining monsters that never existed. Sometimes the simplest explanations are the hardest to forgive. That night, she sat alone in her car overlooking the valley. Fog rolled through the trees like slow smoke. She thought of Ethan's mother, of Ryan's father, of Mark's sister. She thought of Nolan and Harris, men who built lies around an accident until those lies became a labyrinth. Her phone buzzed, message from Keller. Press wants a statement. She typed one line back. Tell them it was an accident and a cover-up. Both can be true. When she turned the ignition, the engine hummed 3 times, paused 3 times again, the pattern she'd lived with for months. Only now she recognized it for what it was, just the sound of machinery, ordinary and endless. The mountains were finally quiet. The press release went out at dawn. Short, technical, bloodless. Preliminary findings indicate accidental detonation during unauthorized mine closure activity. It didn't mention names. It didn't mention Division 7. It didn't mention the 3 friends who'd been buried for 17 years. Detective Linda Perez read the statement once, then set it face down on her desk. Outside the window, rain streaked the glass in perfect vertical lines, as if the world were trying to erase what it had just written. Reporters called nonstop. Producers offered book deals, documentaries, interviews. She said no to all of them, because the story they wanted wasn't truth. It was spectacle, and she had seen enough spectacle to last a lifetime. The official debrief with the Attorney General lasted 2 hours. They thanked her for a resolution, for closure. Closure. She almost laughed at the word. There was nothing closed about the faces that still looked at her from the case board. Ethan, Ryan, Mark, young forever, frozen in that final minute before the earth gave way. When the meeting ended, a government liaison in a gray suit handed her an envelope stamped confidential. Division 7 material is now classified, he said. For your own protection, detective, destroy all copies of your notes. She waited until he left, then opened the envelope. Inside was a non-disclosure agreement thick as a paperback. She didn't sign it. That night she drove back to Evergreen Falls. 17 years earlier, the 3 friends had left from the diner on Main Street. It was still there, same neon sign humming, same cracked countertop. She sat in the corner booth and ordered black coffee. The waitress recognized her from the news. You found them, didn't you? Perez nodded. So it's finally over? She wanted to say yes. Instead, she said, we found what was left. The waitress topped off her cup and whispered, sometimes that's all you get. At the motel that night, Perez spread her files across the bed. Photos, diagrams, transcripts, evidence the government wanted sealed. She looked at the 3 smiling faces in the recovered photo. Ethan with the map, Ryan mid-laugh, Mark holding the camcorder. She thought about how simple their story should have been. 3 kids, a camping trip, a wrong place. But truth is never simple once people start hiding it. Sleep came in fragments. Each time she closed her eyes, she heard the generator hum again, fading into the rhythm of her own heartbeat. She dreamed of the mine, of standing at its edge with light spilling upward instead of down, of voices echoing from below, not asking for help, just asking why. Morning brought a decision. Perez packed her notes into 2 boxes. One labeled Archive, the other Send. The first went to the Attorney General. Per protocol, the second she shipped to an independent journalist she trusted from the early days of the case. Inside, she wrote a single note. If the truth cost me my badge, it's still worth the price. By the end of the week, articles began appearing online. Not the sanitized press release, but the full reconstruction. The hidden barrels, the misfired charge, The cover-up that let 3 families suffer for nearly 2 decades. The response was immediate. Officials denied, deflected, promised inquiries. Perez was suspended pending review. Her access card stopped working, but she felt lighter than she had in years. She returned once more to Iron Ridge. The site was quiet now, sealed again under concrete. Wildflowers had already started pushing through the cracks. She placed 3 markers at the edge of the clearing. No names, just initials. EMRJMH. For a long time she stood there, listening to the breeze move through the pines. No hum, no machinery, only the sound of the forest finally breathing on its own. When she turned to leave, she noticed something half buried in the dirt, a fragment of clear plastic. She brushed it off. It was a lens from Mark's camcorder, the one that had recorded everything. She slipped it into her pocket. Not evidence anymore, just memory. Driving back through the valley, Perez dictated her final field note into the recorder. Case number 0510-17 closed. Outcome, accidental deaths, suppressed by fear of accountability. Lesson, truth takes longer than lies, but it travels farther. She stopped the recording. Silence filled the car. For the first time, it felt like peace. That evening she mailed her resignation. No press conference. No farewell speech. Just a short line at the bottom of the form. Sometimes justice means telling the story, not keeping the job. Weeks later, as headlines faded and the next tragedy took their place, Perez drove past the town one last time. The diner lights were off. Rain shimmered across the highway. She didn't look back. She didn't need to, because behind her, somewhere in those hills, the truth was finally unburied, and it would never go quiet again. Time moved on, but the valley never forgot. Seasons turned the site of Iron Ridge into something quiet again. Grass over gravel, flowers through cracks, a forest pretending it had never swallowed anyone at all. The investigation was closed, the file sealed, but memory has its own jurisdiction. Every year, when June came around, someone left 3 candles at the gate. No note, no name, just flame against the wind. 2 years after her resignation, Linda Perez lived 3 states away, working small consultancy cases, staying off the grid. Her badge was gone, her title erased, but her mind still lived in those woods. Sometimes, when she boiled water for coffee, the hiss of the kettle would sound like the hum of that generator. She'd turn it off, breathe, and remind herself, it's just steam, not memory. The state eventually admitted fault. Not murder, not conspiracy. Just administrative negligence. A settlement split among the families. Paper reparations for 17 years of silence. Ethan Moore's mother used the money to build a scholarship for environmental science students. Ryan Jacobs' father bought new lights for the high school football field where his son once played. Mark Holloway's sister started a podcast for cold case awareness. None of them called it closure. They called it dignity. The documentary Offers Never Stopped. When producers reached out to Perez for comment, she sent the same reply every time. The truth is an entertainment. Then she'd delete the message and take another walk along the coastal trail near her new home. She'd watch the waves break. The same rhythm she'd once heard in those recordings. 3 beats, pause, 3 again. Nature has patterns. We just mistake them for ghosts. One autumn morning, a box arrived without a return address. Inside, a flash drive, a folded letter, and a rust-stained forestry badge. The letter had only one line. For the record, I'm sorry. GH. Perez plugged in the drive. It held digitized copies of old Division 7 documents. Maps showing more Q-series shafts across the Northwest. Each annotated with the same warning. Do not excavate. There were no coordinates matching the friends' campsite. It was as if their tragedy had erased itself from official history. Perez archived the files, encrypted them, and sent one copy to a public records journalist with no explanation. Transparency doesn't always start with a speech. Sometimes it starts with an anonymous email. That winter, the town of Evergreen Falls held a memorial. Simple wooden crosses, 3 names carved in white paint. Perez stood at the back of the crowd. No one recognized her. She preferred it that way. When the service ended, a boy, maybe 10 years old, asked his mother, "Mom, why did it take so long to find them?" The woman thought for a moment, then said, "Because sometimes grown-ups don't want to look in the right place." Perez smiled quietly. That was the answer she'd been searching for all along. In her final private report, never filed, she wrote, "Truth doesn't live in the evidence room. It lives in what we do after we know it." She kept the camcorder lens on her windowsill, its glass catching the light each morning like an eye that never blinked. When the sun hit just right, a tiny reflection scattered across the wall. 3 bright dots side by side. She liked to think of them as Ethan, Ryan, and Mark. Years later, heavy rains exposed a piece of rusted metal near the old Q-17 site. Archaeologists found it was the tip of a collapsed sign. After restoration, 3 letters became legible: MHT, the remnants of Mine Hazard Trail. Locals joked that the forest was still trying to confess. When Perez finally moved inland, she left one thing behind: a sealed envelope addressed to the county archives. Inside was a note written in her tidy, unhurried hand. "If anyone asks why I kept searching, tell them silence is not peace. It's just a story waiting to be told." 17 years had taken 3 lives. Another 5 had taken their mystery. But the lesson remained carved in the stone markers at Iron Ridge. The truth doesn't vanish. It just waits for someone brave enough to dig it up. As dusk settled over the forest, wind slid through the pines like a sigh. For the first time, it sounded gentle. No hum, no echo, just quiet, as if the earth itself was finally resting. And above that silence, Perez's voice, faint but steady, recorded one last entry into her handheld mic. If this story stays with you, hit subscribe and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And when the truth found you, a new chapter, another case, another echo, but this time the truth would not be buried.